Now, the other thing that you mentioned was this question of what does postmodernism have to offer? And you said, postmodernists are always going off about quantum physics and Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So, isn't this a bit of a contradiction because, they're testaments to how great modernism is? I kind of think of them as like a proof by contradiction. It's kind of like saying, well, okay, if you insist on believing that there is objectivity and that rationality can get you to anywhere you need to go, then you're not going to believe any arguments given by someone who doesn't believe in rationality. But even so, you still won't be allowed to continue believing in, the totality of rationality, because if you follow those principles all the way to their conclusion, they contradict themselves. If you believe that through logic we can discover everything, then the contradiction is that through logic you actually discover that some things are undiscoverable. So what does postmodernism have to offer? Well, I think that the best thing that postmodernism has to offer is self-reflexivity. I think I've talked about this in a few of my other videos, but I really think that self-reflexivity is the best feature of postmodernism, and that's really what was at fault in modernity. That's why we kept hurting ourselves with these new technologies that we created. Because modernism isn't conscious, it's not self-conscious. It doesn't know whether it's running a death camp or if it's running a hospital. It couldn't care less. It's just a set of cold, hard rules as to how to run things efficiently. And the worshipping of those things above everything else just leads to bad outcomes. You've got to go about the world in a self-conscious manner. You have to know what you're doing, be aware of it, and think about it. And that's what postmodernism has to offer. Okay, so here's what Max Horkheimer has to say on this issue, and essentially what he's saying is that this modernist worldview, here he's talking about the question of theory specifically, is characterized by this, self-belief in autonomy, and this self-belief that it is, really going according to its own principles, and that's what's really defining it. It's just following the rational course and going wherever that leads it. And that's really not being self-conscious, and that's not at recognizing the reality of what's going on around it. And that's not a thing that science really is capable of doing. It's not capable of realizing the social influences on it. Science isn't capable of realizing why it's asking the questions that it's asking and why it's doing the experiments that it's doing. And that's really what's deciding what science finds out. The fact that the Nazis had this science of racism, and the fact that they had, this business of death camps, is a factor of greater questions of what's going on in the society around them and what other fundamental beliefs that they have. But by pretending that that's not the case, by pretending that, we're just following the logic of science and it just objectively takes us to whatever's correct, that's how we get ourselves into trouble. So here's how he put it. The traditional idea of theory is based on scientific activity as carried on within the division of labour at a particular stage in the latter's development. It corresponds to the activity of the scholar, which takes place alongside all other activities of a society, but in no immediately clear connection with them. In this view of theory, therefore, the real social function of science is not made manifest. It speaks not of what theory means in human life, but only of what it means in the isolated sphere in which, for historical reasons, it comes into existence. Yet, as a matter of fact, the life of society is the result of all the work done in the various sectors of production. Even if, therefore, the division of labour in the capitalist system functions but poorly, its branches, including science, do not become for that reason self-sufficient and independent. They are particular instances of the way in which society comes to grips with nature and maintains its own inherited form. So essentially, by not pretending to autonomy and by not pretending to objectivity, but by maintaining self-consciousness, self-awareness of what we're doing, and questioning ourselves about what we're doing and why we're doing it, that's what postmodernism can give us. Another thing that it gives us is everything. It can give us everything that the belief in absolutes took away. You know, all of the discarded answers and cultures and meanings and perspectives and possibilities and political systems and works of art and everything that was rejected since it was not absolute truth, was not objectively right. All these things are now back on the table. They're now available to us. I said in a previous video of mine that we live in a world populated by infinite meanings. Modernism tried to take that away. It tried to say there's just one meaning, there's just one correct meaning. And it didn't take very long to find out that there is no rational basis on which to identify which meaning that one correct one is. And lots of people took that to mean that there was no meanings. But really it means that all of the meanings are still there, and they're all equally as good as each other. That means that science is not off the table. You know, rational thinking is not off the table. It's just not at the head of the hierarchy anymore. There's no more hierarchy. There's just everything together in a really complex network of relationships. Yeah, I want to make it very clear, I'm not anti-science. I think that science, especially natural sciences, are, you know, the way to go about answering those questions, but only if we guide ourselves in a self-conscious manner as to, you know, what questions we should be asking, what fields we should be exploring. And we don't keep making the mistake of thinking science can answer questions about human affairs, that science can tell us about right and wrong, that science can tell us about who deserves to live as a human being. Science can't answer a whole bunch of questions, but realizing that doesn't mean you have to be anti-science. So I want to make that very clear that I'm not anti-science and I'm not anti-rationality. I'm just against them coming to dominate everything else. Alright, so I hope that was a coherent enough answer to your questions. See ya!